Hello, wine drinking people. It's Friday, March 26th. And thank God it's Friday. I've got one more day to go till spring break with the kids. And we had somewhat of an Olympic day in the store yesterday for the What I Drank Yesterday section of the show. We started out the day with one of my favorite suppliers, Pandora Anwil. Pandora stopped by with some of selections from her collection of wines that she helps to market in South Florida. And the first thing she brought by was the Buehler 2008 Russian River Valley Chardonnay. Buehler is a Napa Valley winery. The winery is located in the mountains just to the east of St. Helena. And this is the only wine that they make outside of Napa. It's typical Russian River, a lot of juicy fruit, just a little hint of minerality, a little hint of oak spice, and a really nice little value for Russian River. We have this wine on sale for $14.50. Then we had one of the best wines I've ever had from Portugal, not a fortified wine, but a dry wine, and the Douro Valley is making more and more dry wine. This wine was the 2007 Dal Val d'O Bonfin. This is one of their single vineyards, one of their prize vineyards in the Douro. And I learned something yesterday about one of the reasons why Dal's making still wine. There's only a certain amount of wine that can be produced in port and turned into port every year. So the producers in the Douro have to do something with this wine. They can either make it into neutral spirits, they can turn it into table wine, which is what a lot of the better producers are starting to do. And before, all of their top level grapes went into their best ports, their vintage ports. Usually 2 or 3 times a decade they'll declare a vintage year. The rest of the wines went into the late bottle vintage program, and then the rest of the stuff that was left went into the Ruby program. So, and of course there's a little bit left for the Tawnies and the Collietas, the single vintage Tawnies. So in the mid-'80s they started replanting the Douro Valley, and before that all of the vineyards were planted to field blends. So there was Touriga Nacional, Tinta Sal, Tinta Franca, Tinta Barroca, and all these wines were spread throughout the vineyard kind of willy-nilly. And this replanting that happened in the 80s, they really did a more professional job of planting, so they knew exactly which plots were which varietals. So today you have an abundance of high quality grapes in the Douro Valley, and we're starting to see some really neat stuff. This wine had a lovely black cherry, black plum, somewhat of a sun-dried character to it, with a nice little black earth note that all these Portuguese wines have, very typical of wines from the Douro Valley, and then just a little note of cocoa, but very nice and incredible value at under $10 a bottle. We'll have that in the store probably next week for you. Then we went on to some more Buehler wines, the 2007 Buehler Cabernet Sauvignon Napa. This wine really over-delivers for the money. Lovely cherry, cassis fruit, just a hint of oak spice, a little milk chocolate on the finish. And for a Napa Valley wine, for $19.80 on sale, this wine is a real value. Definitely over-delivers. And then we went on to the 2006 Buehler Estate Cabernet. As I mentioned before, their estate is located just east of St. Helena, up in the mountains, a little bit too low to be considered Howell Mountain, just to the north of Pritchard Hill. And the estate wine, definitely a little step up. And for a 2006 vintage wine, which not near as good of a vintage as '07, I thought this wine was really nice. Packed a really nice solid punch of cassis and blackcurrant fruit, and then some nice earthy minerality notes, and then of course some lovely toasty oak, which was what we love about California wines. Next up, I like a little port in the middle of the day. So we had a little late bottle vintage port from Dow's. Late bottle vintage port is probably the best value in port. Late bottle vintage just means it's all from one vintage, and it was just bottled later. Vintage port is bottled after two years after the vintage. Late bottle vintage, they'll wait 4 to 6 years after the vintage to bottle it. And what this does, it allows the wine to mellow out a little further. And unlike vintage port, which needs 10 or 20 years in the bottle to mature, late bottle vintage ports are usually drinking very nice right on release. And this 2004 Dow's late bottle vintage port was outstanding and a great value at just around $20, $21.75 a bottle. Next up was the Graham 6 grapes, and this wine used to be called Vintage Reserve, I think, but they took that off because the term vintage was a little confusing for people, so they just have it listed as Reserve. This is their non-vintage Ruby port. Very sweet. Graham's probably the sweetest style of all the big houses, and Dow's would be the driest style, but a little bit, too sweet for my taste. This Ruby port, and a little spirity. Well, port's 20% alcohol. It should be spirity. But for my money, I'd rather have the Dow's late bottle vintage any day. That wine will be back in the store if we don't have it shortly. Champagne for a mid-afternoon snack? Why not? Champagne is good at any time of the day. It's good for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And when the folks from Gossé call up, I'm always willing to take time out of my day to taste Gossé. This is one of my favorite champagne houses, one of the oldest champagne houses. And the non-vintage Brut Reserve, Brut Excellence, rather, was one of our best-selling champagnes in the store this last holiday season. This wine is kept for 2 to 3 years on the lees. It's only required that you keep it champagne for 15 months before disgorging. So this wine's got a little extra time, a little bit of that lovely almond character, fresh nutty character you get, fresh baked apple pie, a little bit of jasmine, pineapple, and guava. Really nice, I won't say light style champagne, kind of medium style. Next up, we had the Grand Reserve, which I had always thought the Brut Excellence was their bread and butter champagne at Gossé, but actually the Grand Reserve, for a small upcharge, definitely a much nicer champagne. This wine spends 4 to 5 years on the lees. It's a blend of 45% Chard, 45% Pinot, and the rest Pinot Meunier. This wine definitely packs more of a punch, a little more structured, a little more of that marzipan, almondy note, a little bit of fresh cut grass, a little bit of chamomile blossoms, really nice full-bodied bouquet. And then on the palate, you notice figs and plums. Really interesting champagne with a little bit of a spice on the finish, also some candied cherries. And this wine is $69.75 or on sale for $61.38. And then we had the Rosé. The Rosé is definitely my favorite in the lineup from Gossé. And this Rosé is a blend of red still wine and then their regular champagne, which rosé champagne can be done one of two ways. You can take a still wine, red wine, and blend it in, or you can leave the juice in contact with the skins for a short period of time and make a rosé that way. Most people blend in the still wine. It's much easier to make a consistent product this way. This wine had a lovely nose of raspberries, strawberries, red berry fruit, a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg spice. Very nice. And very silky, creamy mousse on the tongue. The rosé from Gossé, a little expensive at $84, but definitely worth it if you want to have something to celebrate. Which I always say, every day above ground is reason to celebrate. Okay, next we had Craig from Augustin stop by, and he brought us the wines from Paul Hobbs' property Cobos down in Argentina. And Cobos is a joint venture between Paul Hobbs and the Marchioni family. The Marchioni family resides in the Pedregal region of Mendoza. There's only one AOC in South America at the moment, and that's the Luján de Cuyo region of Mendoza. So I think they're in the process of doing this. It may take another 3 to 5 years before you see several more DOCs coming out, but you're definitely going to see it in the next coming years. The 2007 Cobos Brumaire Chardonnay, typical Paul Hobbs Chardonnay, a lot of tropical fruit, a little bit of that butterscotch note you get from the malolactic fermentation. The 2006 Ulysses Vineyard, speaking of Chardonnays from California, from Paul Hobbs, definitely a step up, a bit more concentrated and rich, and some nice toasty oak, some nice spice to this wine, but again, kind of a hefty price tag. This one's $73.50. But hey, Paul has developed quite a brand and a name for himself. He's considered to be one of the top winemakers in California, Argentina, and he does a little work in Chile as well. We have the Veramonte Ritual Pinot in the store that he does. Then next up, we had the Cobos Brumaire Cabernet Sauvignon Marchioni Vineyard. Tasting this wine blind, you would think this is a California Cabernet Sauvignon. Lots of cassis, black cherry, milk chocolate, just really rich, sweet and fruity. Really nice wine, good complexity here too. But again, a high price tag, $79.50. I would rather spend the money on the next wine, the Cobos. This wine is a blockbuster. One of the best wines I've ever had from South America. I mean, just huge, immensely concentrated fruit, big tannins, a lot of fresh acidity, a wine that is built for the long run, a wine that's going to be around 20 or 30 years from now. Killer. I mean, one of the best wines I think I've had all year, period, no matter where it's from, and $186 a bottle. Definitely a little lofty price tag on that one. Okay, well, that's my day in the store yesterday. What are we trying to sell you today? Well, we've got the wines from Casa Lapostolle. Speaking of all-star producers from South America, this Chilean producer produces the best wine coming out of this country from the Colchagua Valley. Their Closa Palta vineyard is where they built a new winery just to make this one wine, Closa Palta, which the 2005 vintage gained the highest accolade from the Wine Spectator Wine of the Year. And this release is the new release has just come out, the 2007 vintage, and we're going to be previewing that on this email and the rest of the wines available from Casa Lapostolle. I'm your host, Andrew Lampasone from the Wine Watch, signing off for today. And remember, always drink the good stuff first.